Hopkinton Town Council special meeting of October 22nd to order with a moment of silent meditation and salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mix up the agenda a little bit tonight to get some items that will be continued and items off the agenda quicker because we've got to go through some language on the solar ordinances. Tom?
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to move Bushy Brook up to the first one. Public forum, first public forum, and then spot number 2, and then old business number 1, spot number 3, and then back to the regular.
Second. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So who's here for the
You guys have microphones up there?
No.
Oh, that's too bad.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Preston Halford, here as the attorney for Southern Sky, the applicant on the Brushy Brook project. And I'm here to request that this matter be continued until the 29th. Mr. Sikarchi, who's been the lead attorney for this, has been before you on this project a number of times, is unfortunately out of the country today. And so we would like to have this continued, if you would, until the 29th.
Okay. Anybody see any issues with that? Oops. Eric, how's that time frame? How's that time frame?
I didn't hear the date.
29th, a week from today?
Not sure.
There's no backup lawyer? I think that's a little ludicrous. I mean, you guys knew this was happening last week.
This is not a sporting event, it's a town council meeting. So the 29th, a week from today, give it a shot. Sound good?
I don't see how we have a choice in the matter, honestly.
All right.
We need to state the location.
Okay, we'll have it here. So 1029 here.
Could we have it in the middle school since we don't have microphones?
We can't hear you!
What are we here for if we can't hear you?
I don't have a microphone.
Then talk louder!
Use that one, share that one.
Is that
You can stand up.
Thank you.
We're going to continue Brushy Brook until 10:29 here or the middle school, I guess,
With a microphone?
with a microphone.
That's all I was saying.
Okay?
Is everybody okay with that?
Council? Okay, 10:29 at the middle school or here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, public forum, I guess first public forum, anyone wishing to be heard on anything on the agenda or off the agenda? So, Eric?
Do you want us to address the ordinance now or later?
The PSCS?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's going to be a total hearing, so you'll have,
Okay.
yeah, so. Yep.
I would just like to. My name is
First public forum.
Joe Moreau, Old Depot Road. I would just like to say this is the second meeting in 2 weeks that has been canceled. The first one I understand because of the space limitation, but the town council was warned about the number of people for that first meeting that it may exceed the town hall. All these residents that changed their schedule to be here last Monday and now a second Monday, and it has to be postponed because the attorney is out of the country. Did the attorney know last week he was going to be out of the country? The other point is most law firms have more than one attorney available, and this is the only attorney that could hear this case for tonight. I changed my plans. I'm sure other people changed their plans. Now, I don't know if there's going to be any more conversation with witnesses for the development at the next meeting, or are they done presenting? That's my only question.
Okay. Well, we'll have a Not sure.
What do you smile?
Yeah. No, Eric.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Eric,
You've got the phone.
First public forum.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to do is comment on two topics, okay? First thing I want to do is deliver to the town council copies of the petition. It's not, I know we're not doing the Brushy Brook hearing, it's not specific to Brushy Brook, but we've been circulating a petition to, in opposition to the current manner of doing business, frankly, in the town, and what, echoing the sentiments that have been expressed repeatedly by the planning board that, and some members of the town council, that the town council has been engaged in a spot zone. So I went off to make copies of this petition for you so that you could have hard copies. I went off to Staples, and at the time I went off to make copies, we had 340 signatures from Hopkinton residents. When I left my house, I had 360, and somebody just handed me 10. So we have 370 signatures from your constituents who are opposing the way we've been going about this, and I'll just give a copy to each of you, and I will send you an updated copy that shows all 370. Now, the reason I printed them, I could have sent PDF and done it another way, but all the comments from your constituents that bothered to comment are printed here. And I think that's really, other than the tally of the raw numbers, I think that's really worth your time to read your comments. I have one for the clerk, too. So we'll just pass it down. And then the other item I just want to address briefly is one of the items on the agenda under old business tonight, and we didn't have a meeting last week. Probably the same number or more came, so this is the second week in a row we've had 75 or 80 people take time out of their schedules to come to a hearing that didn't occur. This item was on the agenda last week, and I raised the issue as to whether or not it had been properly noticed. This is the Maxon Hill 310 Main Street item of business where it's being characterized on your agenda as I believe like a clarification or modification or something. Clarification or modification of the ordinance. As you know, that ordinance, it's very long. I think it's 4 or 5 pages. That was the ordinance that approved the rezoning for 310 Main Street from residential to commercial for solar. And it began with several conditions, and the first one was condition number 1. And condition 1A was that the property would automatically revert to residential zoning at the end of the life or upon termination. And condition 1B was that it was conditioned upon the accuracy of the the developer's representation that he had obtained the final interconnection approval from National Grid. Well, it turns out that he didn't have the final interconnection approval, and he still doesn't have it. And the vote that all of you took was predicated upon that representation being true. So I don't see how that vote can be valid. It seems to me that that ordinance certainly needs to be amended. And it's not a simple matter of just changing one of the conditions because you all voted based upon that predicate. The other thing I want to say is that we have brought this to your attention before. It's not legal to insert a provision that any property automatically revert to another zoning classification. I believe the town solicitor knows this. We informed you on August 6th that there's a Supreme Court precedent for this. And I don't remember that we gave you a copy. You know, I have heard from 2 counselors on this panel that the town solicitor has admitted to them that, in fact, this is a problem that you're going to have to fix, that it's not legal, and you can't insert it. So let me explain what happens with that. If you insert a provision that says 30 years from now something's going to automatically revert to the original zoning, you can't do it because it's a violation of state law. State law says that you have to notice a zoning change, and you have to go through this whole procedure. And first the Superior Court and then the Supreme Court in 1989 upheld that. So what you're really doing, and I think this is almost bordering, and don't yell at me, but this is almost bordering on fraudulent misrepresentation, if you know that, is when you come out in public and you reassure everyone in this room that this property will automatically revert to residential, and you know that that's not possible based on a precedent from the Supreme Court, what's really happening is that you are rezoning property from residential to commercial, and it cannot automatically do anything. The only thing that can happen is 30 years from now, somebody can come up and say, gee, why don't we rezone that back to residential? But you cannot do it unless you follow all of this procedure. And I would like to respectfully ask the town council to consult with the town solicitor and see if he agrees with that, and we could stop promising everyone in this room that this is only sort of borrowing the property or temporary, whatever. As you may also recall, and you can look at the video and you can read the transcript, at the October 1st hearing, well, I've actually had conversations with individual counselors, and I have said, is this automatic reversion a precondition of all of these rezonings of residential RFR 80? Everyone said yes. I said, would you have approved these if it didn't automatically revert? The counselors I spoke to said yes. I was in this room and I asked counselors in this room, are you considering that a prerequisite? Would you do it if it didn't? Will that be a prerequisite of future approvals? And I noted how it was a prerequisite of all those former approvals. So I think any of those approvals that were predicated on an illegal provision could arguably be invalidated, but for sure, with Brushy Brook, Atlantic Solar, whatever else is in the hopper, you can't go on promising that you'll do that because the law won't allow you to do that. So I do have for you, prior to your Maxon Hill discussion, a copy of Title 45 on zoning ordinances. I'll just read one line. This is the state law. No zoning ordinance shall be adopted, repealed, or amended until after a public hearing has been held upon the question before the city, town, and council. And then there are detailed provisions for noticing an amendment to a zoning ordinance. Is it 259? I forgot the number, but the Maxon Hill ordinance is a zoning ordinance. It cannot be amended in any way, and you certainly can't just assume the vote would have been the same if you remove the preconditions. You can't amend it. I'm almost done, and then I'm going to give this to you, and then you can respond. And then here is section 16 of your own ordinances, 16B, I think, procedure for adoption or amendment. The town clerk shall receive all proposals for adoption, amendment, or repeal of the zoning ordinance, and immediately upon receipt of the proposal, clerk shall refer it to the town council, and so forth and so on, and then it goes into the same notice provisions. So I'll give you a copy of that.
Give it to Maria, she'll hand it to us.
Okay, you can put that in the record. So I think this is going to be grounds. I mean, we have enough people in the room here.
Eric, address your...
Yes, there are enough people in the room here, enough people have signed a petition who are not happy about their perception anyway, and this is a point that will have to be settled, that, to put it mildly, I think you're skirting the law with your denial of the supermajority provision, your failure to admit that you are amending an ordinance, your failure to notice it properly. I did check with the town clerk, by the way, and I verified that none of the abutters on Maxon Hill got any notice because you didn't think you needed to provide it. This automatic reversion is absolutely illegal, and you've predicated your entire approval process on it, and you've all said that you won't approve these projects without it. So, you know, I think you had a lot of work to do here in terms of your regime.
Okay, anyone else for the first public forum? There will be a second public forum. We've got to go through a few things ahead of that, but Mr. Krolwitz, did you have?
I'd like to answer, Mr. Goodler.
Sure. It's not a debate, it's just
No,
direct comments.
it's just so everybody knows. My name is Ron Krolwitz, I live at 278 Main Street. The statement that none of the abutters was not notified, is absolutely false. I was notified many months ago, I don't want to put a date on it, of what they were thinking of doing. I was notified of every meeting that was going to be held, and I got a letter today about the meeting tonight, just so that everybody knows that that statement is false.
Thanks. Okay.
Right, we don't want to go back and forth, but
All right, it's not a debate. It's not debate club.
I got the information from the town clerk.
Okay, well, we'll clarify it. No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda, Tom, was the first item on the old business. Okay. Which is tonight, discuss, consider, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I asked.
I'm Walter Sikowicz. I own a large piece of property on Hopkinton Exeter line. I've owned large pieces of property for 57 years. I started school in this area when this building wasn't even here, this part of the building. Now, when I was 21, I looked for land, not a house, I looked for land, because I like land. I didn't care what the house was, I could fix it up. Like I said, I've owned 57 years, I've kept big pieces of land, I think I did my part to keep this area rural. Now, a lot of people came in, more people came in than what that's. This country gave everybody property rights. I feel a large landowner is the only one that doesn't have them anymore. Thank you.
Okay. First item under old business was moved to the third spot. Discuss, consider, and possibly vote to approve a motion for clarification and/or reconsideration of condition number 1 of the Town of Hopkinton, Rhode Island Town Council decision May 21, 2018 as amended, June 18, 2018, filed on behalf of Rhode Island Solar Renewable Energy, LLC, 43 Creston Way, Warwick, Rhode Island, 02886, and Maxon Hill, LLC, 10 Lacosta Farm Road, Hope Valley, Rhode Island, 02832, for property owned by Maxon Hill, LLC, located at 310 Main Street, Hopkinton, Rhode Island. Mr. Mancini?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. John Mancini on behalf of the applicant. To clarify a few important points, we have filed a motion for reconsideration. I'm sorry? We have filed a motion for reconsideration. The purpose of the motion for reconsideration is essentially to seek clarification from this board in regards to its decision that was rendered concerning the solar array project back in June of 2018. And the question is really more of an informational point. And I want to refer the council to its June 18, 2018 decision, which we've appendixed to the actual motion for clarification. That decision recited the facts, made specific findings, which are legislative findings by this board. And then it predicated its decision upon conditions. one of which is noted as condition 1B on page 2. And it states that the applicant's representation that the use of the site as a photovoltaic solar energy system has received the final interconnection approval of the solar array facility by National Grid is accurate. The concern we have is with the wording final interconnection approval. With regards to these projects by National Grid, there is a series of different events that take place. And the final interconnection approval, what that denotes is the actual connection from the wiring, the capacity of the project to the substation or to the connector, to the actual physical connector. The appropriate item that was presented to the board is what I believe the board was referencing, which is what the exhibit was that was part of that. And that is labeled as the system impact study for distributed generation interconnection for National Grid. It was the final document, and it's labeled final, and it's the final approval that is the study that finds two things. One, it finds that the location is acceptable and that the connection is acceptable. That the location is acceptable and that the connection is acceptable. And the date of that document was given to this board on May 7, 2018. And it was an extensive document of 22 pages. It's part of the exhibit. This we note is the document that is referenced, or that can be referenced by the board in its decision. And the reason why we say that is because there was no other documentation that was provided. There was nothing else that this board could have relied upon when it made its decision, because the applicant didn't have the final connection. Final connection would only come after the project is constructed, and that's actually, in essence, putting the plug into the outlet, if you will. So what we're asking is essentially clarifying that what the board meant in that condition was actually this study, this May 7, 2018 study, which was made part of the record, and we can submit to the board another copy of that study. So we're not asking for an amendment to the ordinance. We're not asking for a rehearing on the ordinance. We're not asking for reconsideration of your ordinance in its entirety or the conditions or how they interplay with one another. What we're asking is for the board to be made aware of this condition. And the question is why? Well, we understand that these documents have to be very particular because there's significant amount of reliance on these documents by various entities, one of which is National Grid. Another is your planning board, but most importantly is the lender. The lender on the project has to have confirmation and assurance that everything is being met to the T of the law and that there are no questions or other issues that are left unanswered or left to any speculation. And this is one issue that just we've noted as a question mark. And for that purpose, we want to bring it to the council's attention and see if there's a meeting of the minds with regards to what was discussed and what was considered by the council at the time that they noted in its decision the final interconnection approval. As you know, the applicant doesn't draft the decisions, the applicant doesn't make the decisions. The decisions are memorialization of the discussions of the board, and most importantly, they incorporate and have to incorporate the exhibits. That's what makes the decision a substantial decision. And so with that, we ask for discussion and a review of that.
Thanks, Mr. Vincent. Thank you. Kevin, you want to give the board, I guess, any clarification? I guess that might help us to understand some of this verbiage that Mr. Mancini has described.
I'd be glad to do that. First of all, the objection raised in the public forum about whether or not the notice was proper for this hearing, it is my definite opinion that the notice is entirely proper to be here before us tonight. That this is not a proposed zoning amendment or an amendment to a zoning ordinance. That was all done when the ordinance was passed several weeks ago. What this is as Attorney Mancini has said, what's been brought before us tonight by the applicant is a motion to clarify what was meant by condition 1B. So that's what they're seeking is a clarification or a language change to condition 1B, which is entirely limited to this question about what final approval or what approval the council had in mind that would be required from National Grid. The representation was made before the hearing closed in May that the applicant had an assurance that an interconnection approval will be given by National Grid at the appropriate time, which is at the completion of the project. So it's a technical language adjustment is being requested. It is certainly within the purview of this council to grant that language change or to not grant that language change. But everything is in the proper form for consideration tonight, and it's properly noticed, and it's just up to the council whether they're willing to adjust the language relative to the nature of the final approval or approval by National Grid that the council had in mind at the time it adopted the ordinance.
Okay. All right, so thanks, Kevin and Mr. Mancini. I guess I'll start with the council. Anyone want to have any questions or want to add anything? Or
I happen to agree with Eric that I think this should be considered not in one night, but to give us all time to take a look since we are reopening this ordinance. Now, Dave and I voted against the ordinance, so I'm perfectly happy to open it again. However, on the note that the attorney has mentioned, and the problem he has is the sentence, solar energy system has received the final interconnection approval of the solar array facility by National Grid, is accurate, which of course it's not accurate, but I do believe what the council meant, even if I disapprove of it, is what we have in the new PSES ordinance, which is clearing existing vegetation from the area proposed to site the PSES is not permitted prior to the applicant executing an interconnection agreement with the public utility. I believe they probably, in fairness, meant the final interconnection agreement, not the final interconnection approval. I do think this should be brought forward, though, because there are certainly, if indeed the council is going to continue to pass this ordinance, I have certainly other things I would like to add to it to make it a little more useful for the town.
okay, thanks, Barbara. David, do you have anything?
I just think that if we remove the word final, that this can fly. That's just my thinking on the matter. Although I'd like to have Kevin, I have no problem with Kevin making a suggestion as to what he feels can be done to clarify this section B, if you don't mind, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Sylvia, you have any?
So my understanding is, and has been looking this over, that we need to clarify it. It is a simple, it's just a few words that need to be changed, and it has to do with the feasibility of the interconnection. And it makes sense that National Grid would come in after the project's done, so they make sure everything that was supposed to be done is done electrically, and only then would they give final approval. And if they didn't give final approval at that point, it's because something was wrong and they'd have to rectify it. So it all does make sense. So I can't say any more about it.
Sylvia, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Anybody who has a house, builds a house, and has it wired, you can't turn the power on until the electrical inspector comes in and inspects. This was not my intention. Dave, I think you made a valid point. I think if we just take that word final out,
That's right.
that reads exactly what I had thought it was going to be.
Okay, thanks, Tom, Sylvia, and Barbara and Dave. I know when I approved this project, the intent wasn't to prevent them from getting financing, so I know that was for a fact for me. But Kevin, I guess, can you offer any amendment to what we've approved, I guess, that would make this situation work?
Yeah.
I don't want to give the impression that I'm doing this off the top of my head. I just anticipated that question might come up tonight, so I took the liberty to draft what my suggestion would be. Now, I did not have the benefit of the other council members' comments when I wrote this, so I'm not arguing against what any of them said, but this is what I thought would solve the problem with some minor changes. I suggested that the current section, subsection B, which is this national grid issue, change and to read as follows. B, that the applicant's representation that the use of the site as a photovoltaic solar energy system has received the final approval for the feasibility of the connection of the solar array facility by National Grid is accurate, and that at this time the applicant has received an assurance that such an interconnection approval will be given by National Grid at the appropriate time, which is at the completion of the construction of the project. That's what I understood.
Can you read it again?
Yes.
The whole thing.
I'm going to say PSES so I don't stumble over photovoltaic again. Other than that, I'll read it without hesitation. That the applicant's representation that the use of the site as a PSES has received the final approval for the feasibility of the interconnection of the solar array facility by National Grid is accurate, and that at this time the applicant has received an assurance that such an interconnection approval will be given by National Grid at the appropriate time, which is at the completion of the construction of the project.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. No. I guess, you guys have any questions about what Kevin said? About money? You like it? Barbara, you okay with it?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So moved.
Yeah, please. All right. A motion was made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, folks, we're going to go through our, it's number one on the agenda tonight, PSES ordinance amendment. Opening hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 246, non-residential photovoltaic solar energy systems, Code of Ordinances 134, Chapter 134, Appendix A, entitled Zoning, introduced and sponsored by all the councilors, myself, Tom, Barbara, David, and Sylvia. Proposed amendments would add, revise, and/or strike language. We've had, I believe, one workshop on this, or two, Jim? Two, okay. So we've got a working draft. I know we've all studied that and made some further modifications, perhaps. Jim, do you have any comments initially, or does the council want to start? Anybody want to start in with page 1 and just go through it? Okay. If anyone doesn't have copies of this proposed amendment to the ordinance, it's up here on the table. Okay, it's Chapter 246, non-residential photovoltaic solar energy systems. I think, is Al here tonight? I can't see him. Yeah, okay. Al, if you want to come to the front, it might be helpful. I know that when we first put this ordinance together, we had the best of intentions, and Obviously, once it was implemented, then we realized there were some issues with it. I know you folks had issues with it, and we ultimately agreed. I think that some of the clear cutting or solar panel mounts had to be changed. So this draft document is a culmination of, I guess, some of the changes that we want. So do you want to just add some general thoughts, I guess, or I know we're going to go through the...
Wait for questions.
Okay. All right, so we're going to... Does anybody have any questions or concerns, I guess, about page 1?
No.
Page 2 starts with the purpose and applicability. Any questions there? I had questions on that too. Okay. Tom, what do you have?
Well, my question is, why are these 4 lots listed? Jim, I don't know who was in...
This was not a planning board idea, to the best of my knowledge. Sorry about the volume. Do I need to speak up? Yes. One of the exceptions? Yeah.
Okay, so page 2, item F, exemptions. It reads, the planning board shall have the authority to waive and or modify any of the provisions of this ordinance within their review process for PSES located in on the following properties. AP 1327, AP 24, lot 172, AP 24, lot 173, AP 25, lot 23. To the best of my knowledge, the planning board did not come up with this idea. I have no idea. I've reviewed the sites. I understand where they're located. They're predominantly wetland sites. I have no idea why they're in here. Whoever came up with this item probably is the person to answer your question.
When we had the discussions with this, with the planning board at that meeting, this was supposed to mean town-owned properties so that in the future we could put a solar on the Stubbtown landfill. And listing different properties that the town owns is going to just upset people. They think we're going to do something on West Street or we're going to do something on Laurel Street, when the intention is just to have a broad statement. It's town properties, and our idea has been ongoing since for practically 2 years now. Just the idea of putting solar on our landfill. That's all. So it should say town properties.
I understand that point of view, but I don't see why the planning board shall have the authority to waive and or modify any of the provisions of the ordinance. I would think that they would do that under their purview when they do the review process anyway, whether it's our properties or someone else's. I'm not sure that it's a necessary portion. It would be something they would do automatically.
Al, any comments about town-owned properties and whether that planning board should be able to weigh in on that or not, or waive conditions?
I think it's a great idea that the town wants to suggest that perhaps these activities are situated on town properties. I'd be advocating that they put them in parking lots, etc. But I think it might be more appropriate to simply make a statement to that effect, that the town is encouraging this kind of thing on town properties. Once we get involved with citing the specific properties, well, what happens when the town acquires more better property that are perhaps more appropriate for these sightings? So maybe eliminate the specific sites and use a general
Town. That's Sylvia's suggestion, okay. You guys okay with that, Charlotte?
I'm okay with the concept, but I'm not okay with the reality. Crandall Field is town-owned. It's a great place for solar. I definitely don't want it there. Someone in the future may come up with that as a great idea. So I would just like not to have it and assume that the planning board will know the intent of the council and will be able to accomplish it.
Barbara, I want to disagree with you. Crandall's Field was given to the town
some major stipulations. So there's no way we can ever do anything with that, otherwise it gets taken back by the Crandalls.
Okay, is everybody in agreement with just labeling as town-owned properties instead of specific lot, plat and lot numbers? Dave? Okay. That sounds good. Al, the only question I had was, could we stick in before review development plan? Or does that matter?
I'm sorry, the question was?
I'm still on letter F. It says within their review. I was thinking, should we stick in development plan review? Or is that not appropriate? No. Because I know you go through that.
Further on in the proposed ordinance is the fact that we are going to be using the development plan ordinance, so I might be a little bit redundant.
Just a quick one. Okay, thank you. I think we're set with page number 2. Okay, go ahead, Bob.
All right, we'll make a motion to add F exemption. I make a motion to add F exemptions as discussed.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Page 3. Any questions from the council on page 3? Al, any questions from your end on page 3?
No.
The only thing I had was the very first one, which was, I guess, number 1. Should we put within reason rather than 100%? It's just a note that I put some time ago. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to anyone else, but... Oh, okay.
Okay. I mean, it's only doubling what the zone allows in the first place.
Okay.
As much as.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's the only question I had on page 3. Anyone else have any questions on page 3? Okay. Page 4? Okay. Sylvia?
In number 13, let's see. I don't want to read the entire, I'll start with the sentence, I think. In the middle of the section, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down on number 13, page 4, where it says during the pre-application phase of development plan review, the planning board reserves the right to adjust the allowable coverage percentage based upon the unique characteristics of the parcel, etc. What I'd like to do is insert and change a word where it says the planning board reserves the right to adjust. I'd like to see them say the planning board reserves the right to increase the allowable coverage percentage based upon unique characteristics. And the reason I asked for that is because of the landfill specifically. There may be, well, actually, that's not even a good example because we just exempted that. So a better example would just be in instances where the planning board has decided, for instance, an old sandbank, because we did 2 sandbanks. And we want to be able to, if there's someone in town that has a legal sand business, and the planning board decides that that would be a good place to put a solar project. If the planning board wants that, then they wouldn't hold somebody to 30% perhaps. They might allow an increase. So that was my reasoning behind it. Instead of adjust, just to say increase, that's all.
Okay. Okay. Barbara?
I agree with Tom. Adjust means either way. I would like to leave it as is.
I also agree that adjust means either way. Once you say increase, you've eliminated the idea of decreasing. like to talk about the 30% at some point, so that seems sensible.
All right, Sylvia, do you have any other questions on number 13? Okay, Tom, you go with 13 at this point? David, you had a question on 13?
Yeah. It says here, I have a big voice, I can also get them sitting. It says, if the parcel is zoned RFR 80 and the applicant is seeking to rezone the parcel, no more than 30% of the parcel shall be covered. Are we talking 30% of the good land or the entire parcel? Because a lot of these properties have wetlands on them, and I'm sure somebody's going to come in and say 50% of this parcel is wetlands. So I wanted to have more than 30% of the dry land. I want 30% of the entire amount. You see what I'm saying? They're going to say they're going to use up 60% of the good land because they're including the entire parcel, which includes wetlands. Now, is it 30% of the entire parcel, or is it going to be 30% of the available land?
I know at our last meeting, Al, you had an answer for that, right? I think what our intent was, there was two percentages, one for solar panel coverage and one for land clearing coverage. I think it was 30 and 40% respectively. Do you want to add anything or clarify what David?
Okay, so two thoughts. I didn't have the opportunity to address such an expansive crowd the last time around, so maybe I can just tackle how the 30% number came in first. So the planning board in its deliberations went to the dimensional regulation tables. And for RFR 80, it has 15% lot coverage. And so our thoughts were, if a parcel is going to be rezoned, what do the abutting property owners, what are their expectations? It should be for something in the order of 15%, because that's what the town allows. The planning board thought that the 15% might be a little bit stringent, so we adopted the 30% number, and that's what's in the proposal. That's how the number got here. As to David's question, as to we're taking 30% of what?
Right.
Current understanding is it's 30% of the total area. That's how I believe the planning board would interpret that today. So if you wanted to make some other recommendation that the 30% needs to be of the upland area, I leave that to you. Current is total area.
Okay, anyone, Barbara?
So does that mean you want to add no more than 30% of the entire parcel shall be covered on the fourth line? The PS, if the parcel, no more than 30%, no, it just says of the parcel, of the total parcel.
That's right.
Makes sense.
It says manufacturing zone parcels, commercial and manufacturing zone parcels.
Yeah,
If the parcel is zoned RFR 80, the applicant is seeking to rezone the parcel entire. No more than 30% of that parcel shall be covered.
And read the next sentence.
So that's
The next sentence.
the purpose of the PSE. Lot coverage includes all of the land upon which the structures associated equipment are placed. Such land area includes all of the land lying directly below the solar panels and associated equipment, as well as, yeah, whatever that is, spaces between the solar panels.
Yeah, I assumed that it was the entire parcel.
I hope so.
Okay, thanks.
And Al said they would interpret it the same way.
Right. Okay, any other questions on section 13, folks? Okay. Section 14. Al, the only question I had, again, stems back to that development plan review that we're going I guess, adopt through this ordinance amendment. Does number 14, wouldn't that be also done through that development plan review? I guess, is this redundant to have it, or is it, or do we need to keep it? And that's my question. Okay. You guys have any questions on the rest of page 4?
Mr. President, number 14, line 4, I think we need the word "not" in there, where it says "does not yield a noise level that exceeds 40."
Good catch, Jim.
You share that with us?
Yes, section 14, the planner had suggested, I think it's the 4th sentence down, as designed does not yield a noise level that exceeds 40 decibels. The word "not" is not in there. Okay. Anything else on page 4, folks?
Do we need motions on every change we make as we go through it, like we did with the first one?
Just make motion, we'll make one motion at the end for all the changes. Rita?
Well, I don't know if everybody agrees with the changes we're making.
Oh, okay.
Are we getting enough public comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll make a motion that I'll make a motion that there is no change to number 13, and the change on number 14 is to add the word "not."
Second.
Motion made and second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay. Need a motion to include the word "not" in section 14?
She did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right, anything else on page 4? Okay. Page 5?
Several things, Frank.
Okay.
Under the land clearing and environmental impact, maybe I missed these, I don't see them. Apparently, I don't see anything in here as to what type of chemicals are going to be used to maintain or knock down the brush and the grass that's going to be growing around these solar panels. There's a story out that a certain solar panel in this town, somebody used Roundup on it. I don't want Roundup in the ground. I don't care how far away it is from a residential area. I don't want Roundup on the ground. If you want to mow it down, if you want to take a size to it, don't put chemicals on it. Don't put chemicals on it. That's one thing. So the other thing is, I don't see anything in here, maybe I'm missing it again. I don't see anything in this ordinance about removal of ground cover. Now, I thought we talked about removing topsoil off of the site. And I don't see it in here, and I think it should be in here. Because if you're ever going to revert this thing back to RFR 80, you certainly don't want to give it back a gravel bank.
I think we addressed the chemicals in operation and maintenance plan, which will be page 7, because no chemicals will be used in the operation and maintenance of the PSES unless approved by the planning board, just in case something new comes up with it. But that one I think is covered. However, I do not know, and maybe someone else does, if the topsoil is in this, because I think he's correct that it's not.
I may have to look at the old version, because it was in there.
Al, do you remember seeing that in there? I don't, okay. Okay. Oh, okay.
It's just as Barbara pointed out, it's further on.
Yeah, page 7.
Okay.
But add something to the page.
Oh, okay, here you go.
I believe we wanted to add a number 11 to the top. It was, the heading was, I'm sorry, it must not be this. Sorry, it's not a number 11 for that page. It's not for roof mount.
Anything else, council, on or planning on page 5?
Right, what are we going to do about topsoil?
I'm going to look for it, Dave. I'm not sure if it's in this amendment.
Because I know we discussed it.
We should use that, absolutely.
Anything else on page 5, folks? Okay. Page 6. Barbara?
On page 6, number 2, appurtenant structures, I would like to add as a D, all pad, and Al, I need some help here. It's not the cement pads, it's called something else, but all cement pads that, or any portion of the solar array that, no, that contain fluids will be in a containment facility to prevent any fluid leaks or spills. Specifically, that's the inverters, but specifically the transformers. I don't know how you may want to say that more clearly. So that all... What's it? Yeah.
Needs to be contained.
Right, all
Spill containment system.
is mandated to prevent any fluid leaks or spills anywhere on the property of the solar array.
What are islands?
It's specifically the islands, but it's not, the solar panels are not chemical, they're electrical. So I don't think there's any fluid in them. However, there certainly is fluid in the transformers, and maybe slightly some in the inverters, but it's mostly the transformers. I just need to make sure that's in what I would call a revetment, that they call containment. So not just a flat cement pad.
I agree, I think you're on the right track. I'd like to see something perhaps general that says any equipment that contains fluid be either contained in or mounted on a watertight containment vessel of some kind. Planning board has done that previously with one of the boatyards. Same idea. Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So we can add that?
Yes, I think that should be a standalone item, if you're so agreeable.
Can I make a motion to add D? I'll make a motion to add D, which is the containment of liquid section.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Okay. The rest of page 6, any other questions from the council or planning? Okay. Page 7. Any questions, folks? Okay.
I'm looking at my previous notes, I just want to make sure that the reforestation plan must be submitted if the applicant is requesting a zone change from RA to commercial special.
Page 7.
Page 7, I want to make sure that's in here. May have gone on to page 8, actually, on the landscape plan. So maybe I need to wait till.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also have one.
Page 7?
No.
Barbara, you have anything on page 7?
This is under planning board review, which is D. However, it does go to page 7. I would like to add a section that was actually suggested by the state when they came down to add language about historic properties, that no solar array can be established in a historic district. All historic views from the historic properties must be considered and saved if possible. They had suggested that, something we had not added, and we certainly have historic properties and historic districts. So I'd like to add that under planning board review, that they can make sure that occurs reasonably.
This is on page 7, Barbara?
Because it's under planning board
What-
review. Number 3.
6, 7.
It would be at number 3.
Number 3 on page 7?
Well, it's page 6 and 7 are the same D.
Yes.
But so D, planning board review, the historic. No solar array can be established in a historic district.
State the page and number again.
7, when they number 3. here where they're above, because this is number 2.
Oh, okay, all right. So we'll make it number 3 to, again, list historic properties.
Yeah, that's there. No solar array can be established in a historic district. All historic views from these historic properties must be considered and saved if possible.
Okay, motion
Number
to
one
accept.
was stricken.
Oh, what's that, Jim?
Maybe that should be at number 2, because if you look above there, number 1 was stricken in its entirety,
Yeah.
and 2, I guess, remains, part of it remains. So maybe that should be 1 and 2 instead of,
Oh, yes, I see.
Actually,
2 is stricken as well.
2 is stricken too.
well,
Only part of
well, the 2 is, but there's language under the 2, so it could be a 1.
So we'll make it number 2, and number 2 becomes number 1.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Do I have to have a motion for that?
Motion to make number 2 number 1, and make number 2 the information on the historic properties.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Okay, anything else on page 7? Okay, page 8. Anything, folks?
Operation maintenance plan. Just want to make sure we're not, these pages, well, anyway, we're on page 7, correct? All right. Under number 2, operation and maintenance plan. The addition was the operation and maintenance plan will include a list of all chemicals. And I'd like to make that change to will include, we don't want a list of the chemicals, we don't want any chemicals. So we have to add in that the operation and maintenance plan, well, we do want to say that no chemicals, solvents, or herbicides are allowed to be used on these sites, period. So,
So you're basically getting rid of the first sentence, starting with the second sentence?
yes,
No chemical solvents or herbicides will be used in the operation and maintenance of the PSES unless approved by the planning board.
right, we don't want any chemicals, period, of any type.
Motion to add that language, and remove the first sentence.
Second.
Okay, motion made to add the language, and are you seconded? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Page 8.
As far as the landscaping goes, there's one solar array out there that I would like it mandatory that whoever installs these, and they put the landscaping around the fencing, that they be a minimum of 6 feet. Because there's one that I see all the time that's about 2 feet, and it'll be about 10 years before it gets high enough. The purpose of this was to make sure these were shielded from everybody not to see. So I'd like to add that in there, that the vegetation for shielding is a minimum of 6 feet.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
I also noted a solar installation on Route 3 where they planted arborvitae about 7 or 8 feet apart. It's going to take 20 years for those things to grow tight so you don't see that installation. That's number one. I think most of us, or a lot of us know that one of the prime foods for deer are arborvitae. Those things, I'm going to give them a shelf life of about 6 months. When it gets real cold this winter, I think they're going to be eaten up. We'll see how they make out. I don't know what we're going to do about that situation. You can't put the arborvitae inside the fence, which you probably should do to keep the deer away, but I assure you, you plant arborvitae, deer are going to eat them. And I can show you some examples. And 2 is, I think maybe we should say if you're going to plant arborvitae or some of the, there has to be a minimum distance between the plantings.
All right, so you want to make, some distance changes, height changes,
Yeah.
to buffering, Possibly not arborvitae because they'll get eaten by deer. Leave that to the planning board. You guys are experts at kind of setting that tone, I guess. Unless you think there's something we can put in writing, I guess now.
Okay, so those are excellent comments, but the first few lines of this paragraph suggest to me that that individual should be responsible for making the determination as to what's planted, how high, and how far apart. So instead of trying to say all vegetation should be a minimum of 6 feet high, should be 4 feet on center, maybe what we should state is what are we trying to accomplish with the landscaping? So if the objective is an immediate full screening of the activity from the time of the installation, that's what the landscape architect should be designing for. So perhaps stating the objective is a better idea.
I just want to point out that back on page 6, under number 2, appurtenant structures, number C, the last sentence, all plants, and this is what had been added, all plants and other material used for screening shall be no less than 6 feet in height at the time of installation. So I just want to point out that it talks about the 6 feet here, so if we're going to make any changes, we want to make sure we are familiar with page 6 where it does say 6 feet. But that paragraph says, which I think is good, the screen shall consist of shrubbery, trees, and other non-invasive plant species which provide a visual screen. In lieu of a planting screen, the decorative fence meeting the requirements of zoning ordinance may be used, and then it goes on to other plants. So I would kick it back to Al Diorio to ask him how he'd like to suggest a change.
The reason I would disagree with immediate is as a gardener, if you do something that's completely thick immediately, they'll immediately start dying because they'll be fighting for space. If you give it within 2 years, you have a chance to get the roots established. They'll kill off the smallest or the weakest, and they'll take over. If you put everybody together too tightly, your roots will never have a place to go. So I think Sylvia's right. We already have it in the first part. I don't necessarily think we need to add much in the second part.
No.
What happens if the deer do eat the arborvitae? Can the developer or the landowner say, hey, we planted it, can't help the deer, and and then they don't want to replace them? Should we have a clause in there saying that anything that dies off of frost or deer or whatever has to be replaced?
So typically, I know that when we specify plantings, we don't do that a lot, but most folks, when they specify plantings, it's the developer is held to the 1 year period. So if something dies within a year, they're obligated to replace.
Okay, good.
Typically.
Yep.
If that needs to be built into the ordinance, we should do that, but most folks will put that on the plan. Nobody wants to see a bunch of
Can we
dead.
have 2 years, not 1?
You can make it whatever you'd like. You're in the driver's seat.
Because some things start to that finish out.
Any contractor is only going to usually do it for 1 year. I had to go after contractors for that. So 2 years, I think, is way too excessive, considering where we live in terms of the animals and all that. So I'm comfortable with a year.
We don't have that in writing.
But most of it, if you heard what Al said, he said most of the plans that are submitted cover a year.
Okay.
If you want to put it in there, we can. just reinforces the issue, right? Okay. You guys want to add that? Yeah. You want to make a
What
comment?
exactly?
Adding in the clause of making sure that the, if anything happens to the vegetation that surrounds the site is dies off or is, whatever happens to it, they have 1 year to replace it.
No, if it dies within a year.
Within the year, correct.
Yeah, they don't have a year to replace it.
No, you can replace it if it dies off within the year, or is eaten or whatever.
Fine.
Motion for that?
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
The motion made second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Anything else on page 8, folks?
I'd like to still stay, I'd like to still stay on page 8.
Yeah, so that's,
I'm sorry. I think this is where we need to add the soil, or the soil, Dave.
Oh, I like that.
We need to add
What are we gonna have? Okay. On the landscape plans, I think we need to add a sentence saying that no topsoil of any kind.
No material, any kind.
No material of any kind. I'll take that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Topsoil?
There are some things that should.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, no soil.
No, Kevin just says topsoil could include trees.
Yeah, okay.
No, I wouldn't say anything, no. I'd say no topsoil shall be removed from the site, period.
Second.
So,
the motion was made and seconded. Any further discussion on that change? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Anything else on page 8?
Page 8, under financial security, we need to have a section that allows all interest on all escrow accounts held by the town, all accrued interest on all escrow accounts will be kept by the town of Hopkinton. At this point, we don't have that in any of our recommendations, and if they give us an escrow or a bond, they expect the interest back. That's after 20 or 30 years. It also means we have to have a separate, bank account for each bond and each escrow. I talked to Brian Rosso about it, which he said is going to be quite the problem, because every single PSES is going to have its own savings account for its own interest. I think that we should keep the interest for the town of Hopkinton for the use of our finance department, for the use of all of the people we use and the accounts we use and the computers we use to take care of this money over the course of 30 or 40 or 50 years.
The purpose of having a financial security on these solar projects is to make sure that they're decommissioned properly. All structures are removed and everything's removed back to the original state. Taking the interest is counterproductive to that end. I totally disagree. Leave it in there so it grows, so we have enough money with the principal and interest accrued to decommission the project.
But I think we can use it as such. I'm not saying we can't use it as such, but we should have the right to use it.
No, the purpose is for decommissioning, and that's decommissioning. No, I don't agree with that at all. The interest stays in the interest-bearing account, builds over time for the purposes of decommissioning. That's it.
I don't think you can
Brian is the finance director. He's not on this table, and he doesn't make the decisions for what we want to do with decommissioning.
He's giving good advice.
No, I don't agree with that at all. Any other questions about the decommissioning section, or page 8?
What do we have for, I remember that was a big question when the state came down, as to the amount of bonding that we needed. Did we hear anything back from the state? They were going to look into, give us a number or a way to figure out what's proper?
think you've got some guidance right now that you issue, right, Chip?
Yes.
You have some guidance on that, correct?
The state has begun to compile. The state has begun to compile a table where various communities have posted certain amounts for certain size projects. I don't have the table with me right now, but I did get it. It's a work in progress. I would say what we've been doing so far, we're in the ballpark with others, but it can always be adjusted. But I think the fees we're charging are reasonable to decommission these things.
Reasonable on the high end or the low end? Or right about the
Well, reasonable means in the middle, reasonable. Adequate, I think adequate.
I would rather see that on the high end.
It's a very difficult thing to pinpoint.
I understand that. I mean, 25 years from now, we don't know what costs are going to be, and I don't want to end up having a shortfall to decommission these things. So, I mean, they're going to be making money for 25 years. We can get into that money up front. I think that I'd like to see a copy of that list, and then we can go from there and add it to it.
Okay.
I've seen the tables based on projects throughout the state. It seems to be what we're asking for is in line with what most other communities are asking for the decommissioning portion anyway. So, any other questions about financial security or page 8? Okay. Page 9? Any questions, page 9, folks? So,
I just want to make sure, and I believe this would be the proper place to add an E. Nobody has an E on theirs, right? Okay. Because I don't either. The E, it is page 9, right? And under number 4, removal requirements, you have A through D. I wanted to add an E, which says that the reforestation bond should be, the applicant should provide a reforestation bond or escrow, a cash escrow, in an amount deemed fair by the planning board. That's all.
There was something there, wasn't it?
Yes, the previous page, Sylvia, number 5, financial security. We, the first paragraph in the box, is 125%. For removal.
I'm talking about a reforestation plan.
Oh, separate item.
Right, another escrow account, not just decommissioning, but to reforest.
Yeah.
okay, any, Barbara?
I understand people are interested in reforestation, but in all fairness, these things are staying for 20 years, 50 years. We're not going to be here, we're going to be dead. On top of it, if we leave the land alone for even 5 years, it will come back exactly as it chooses to come back, very naturally and with local flora and fauna. I think the concern of the reforestation plan is we'll all be dead. But more than that, the nature can do this a lot better than we can. And as long as we have everything removed totally and thoroughly, she will do her job a lot better than we can.
Guys, what do you want to do? Alan, what are your thoughts on a reforestation bond? Is that something you think is needed? I have no idea. No idea. Well, I'm looking for the chairman of the planning board to weigh in on it.
It sounds like the first order of business is to define what reforestation means. When this originally came out, there was language here that the developer was supposed to put it back exactly as it was. Well, after calling a few applicants on that language, it was clear that that was not what they were planning on doing. So when we say reforestation, what are we trying to accomplish?
Planting trees.
So do we really think that's going to happen? We're going to get into philosophy here. So first of all, it would be my opinion that when these projects are done, they're going to become subdivisions. Because, think about it, all the trees are gone. This is a developer's dream. So, unless you're going to mandate reforestation, my opinion is, I probably will not be around to see if it proves out, but these are going to be developable lots. This is what the town is zoned for. This is the logical extension of the use of property in our town. So, I'm not really sure what you want to accomplish with reforestation.
Point made, Al. Appreciate it. Any further questions on that? I get why we'd want one, but to Al's point, you know, it could be a development or develop for houses, you know. I'm not sure where to go. I guess we can still kind of maybe table that discussion and yeah, just think about it some more, I guess. You know, maybe sometimes we can, at some point we can quantify some of the trees and whatever, we can figure it out. Maybe there's a minimal amount that we can set aside, perhaps. We'll have to figure that out. Any other questions on page 9, folks? So we'll table that, Sylvia, and come back at a later time. Page 10? Oh, page 9.
It actually goes on to 10 where it says inspection and enforcement, so we're about to go on to the F, which is what I wanted to mention. Under F, before this was something that I would like to see us add into the ordinance. And that is 2 sections. The first one is that before construction begins, a stormwater facility maintenance agreement must be signed and approved between the applicant and the town. And I don't believe that got listed anywhere else. And it's that document that allows, once signed by the applicant or owner of the town, it allows the town to inspect anytime. It requires the applicant to reimburse the town. If we have our engineers go in there for a complaint or a routine inspection, the applicant or owner has to reimburse the town for that labor cost. So that's what the stormwater facility maintenance agreement is all about, and I think it's important for every single project that we do to have that in place. It just gives the town the option of, did it get added?
Yes, it was added.
Page 4. Oh, good, all right.
Before construction begins, the
Good.
PFA's owners will enter into a signed and notarized stormwater facilities management agreement.
Thank you. It's already done. Okay. That last paragraph, where just above adoptions, that paragraph, where it reads, the town engineer designee shall inspect the PSES at the expense of the applicant on a monthly basis during construction and during the month of April each year after the completion of construction. And this is where I wanted to add something. Such said inspection will include a review of any and all reports as required by the state of Rhode Island. So what I wanted to add is that the review would include all reports required by the state of Rhode Island, the town of Hopkinton, and the federal government, because the EPA may get involved in something. That was the only thing I wanted to add.
Sure.
Motion to add that.
Second.
Motion to add that, seconded. Any further questions? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes page 10. That's it, right? Okay. Okay, yes, Amy.
May I just say one thing? Hi, I am sometimes the chair of the planning board when Al has to recuse himself. My name is Annie Williams. I have a question regarding Sylvia's point earlier on page 7 about the operation and maintenance plan. My problem is, as a former chemist, if you say all chemicals, that means they can't use water. I mean, water is a chemical to clean off the surfaces. I understand your intent. I just, you need,
What
I
do you
mean,
suggest?
I think just what we had in there, that we need a list of all chemicals that they're intending to use.
Who's going to dissect that whether they're motion?
Yeah, but,
Right here, and MSD.
Right.
Sylvia added no chemical solvents or herbicides. How about no solvents or herbicides will be used? The
Well-
solvent is a chemical, not.
But water can be a solvent. You just have to be careful with just this no chemicals, because things are,
Then
everything's
exclude
chemical.
water, does that work?
I don't know how the developers are going to clean off. We're allowing this to come into our town. We have to allow the developer to be able to clean their solar panels that they're putting in. So I think if we're allowing this, we just have to be,
Your discretion.
you could say, I think that's why it was initially said that we were going to get a list, just to be aware of what they're intending on using. So
The planning board can change over time.
it can.
And we need to find a way to make this work, because we do not want, you know what I mean, chemicals.
I know.
So we can't just say we
Yeah.
want a list.
Right.
We have to find a way around it.
Well, I understand that, but I think no chemicals is just kind of, if I were a developer, it's a little silly.
There was a hearing in the past where the applicant himself, and it was one of the two larger ones on Main Street, and they had said that they didn't intend to clean them with any chemicals, that rainwater would do it, and that they would clean it off with water. So, I mean, I know I heard that. So if they're saying they can do it with water, why can't we say they have to do it with water?
Okay, I'm just saying water is different than no chemicals.
Right. Excluding water.
Okay.
Okay. Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to say no chemicals excluding water. No chemical solvents or herbicides excluding water will be used in operation.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Anything else, Al?
Thank you. Just one last item, if I may. Let me take you back to page 6. Top of the page, in light of our previous discussion this evening, I think we might want to just tighten up this sentence, right? Presently reads, clearing existing vegetation from the area proposed to site the PSES is not permitted.
Where are you exactly?
Page 6, top.
Page 6.
Top.
Oh, top, okay, gotcha.
Is not permitted prior to the applicant executing an interconnection agreement with the public utility. All right, so suddenly after tonight's discussion, I no longer know what an interconnection agreement is. All I really care about, and I believe the planning board would support me, is I don't want a project started and then we find that we can't plug it in. So I defer to the solicitor. Whatever agreement needs to be in place, that and assure does not make me feel warm and fuzzy. The term assurance. I don't want an assurance. I want money on the table. I want a promise. I want blood. Telling me that this project has been approved by the utility and will be put online when it's constructed. An assurance as to feasibility, in my opinion, doesn't cut it.
Kevin, do you have any, we can further discuss it. You have to work on it, okay, but yeah, point well taken out, thanks. Anything else, Al? No? Okay. Council, you guys? Gals? Okay. I think we're all set. Eric, you guys, I know you sent us some attachments. I think, yes, sir, just weighing in on the ordinance amendments.
Douglas Doe, Cranston, Rhode Island. I want to point out to some of these guys' project at Lippert Ave. And to this question about interconnection agreements, this is critical that you get this right. feasibility study just tells you whether they can connect to the grid. That's all it does. What you need to know is, do they have an actual route and the permission to do the route? Because Cranston officials, Southern Sky, National Grid thought they had the route all planned out. But they needed an anchor easement on city property, which is covered by a DEM conservation easement. Well, they either forgot about it or ignored it until I notified DEM and said, "But you know about this?" The answer is no, never heard about it. So now Southern Sky's in a real pickle because they spent the last 14 months building this project, and they may have to go underground for quite a ways because they can't cut down the trees. And to make it worse, National Grid, the city, and Southern Sky just assumed that the right-of-way was a certain width, and all the trees were on the right-of-way, about 90 of them on this one stretch of road. Well, somebody finally went out and surveyed the right-of-way. If the stakes are accurate, all the trees are in conservation land. They can't cut down those all either. They wanted to cut down a total of 243 trees. So before anybody cuts down anything in any project, you have an actual agreement, an actual route specified, and all the permissions and all the easements in writing recorded. That's what you need. Otherwise, you're just guessing. You're just assuming that everything's going to work out all right. Because they put that easement in front of the city council in July. Their attorney had to withdraw it this month. And that's where it stands. Southern Sky was supposed to take 8 to 10 months. We're now in month 14. And they have no interconnection route. And how they're going to do it. They have no idea what it's going to cost. So it's to their benefit. Because they'll know exactly what it's going to cost to do this interconnection. And as part of their budget, they can make adjustments to their budgets, they can make adjustments to the project, and be in the clear. Right now, Southern Sky's not in that position right now. So I urge you to get this nailed down as tightly as you can. Instead of just saying interconnection agreement, you need to define that in your definitions, what that means, what you need to require. And I urge you to make sure that you record all the necessary easements, especially anchor easements, which are going to go on private property. Because I asked my neighbors for 2 of them, they said, no, go away, don't come back. So this is a critical issue for you. I hope you get it nailed down tightly.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Kevin, can we add record necessary easements to the modification we just made? No, we just made on the reconsideration of condition number 1, the motion for clarification, which was about the agreement or reconsideration of condition number 1 of the town of Hopkinton. We just voted for that. Can we add to record necessary easements as well as get the agreement really clear? Or do we need to open it again?
We just made a decision on that, so you can ask Kevin offline, I guess, whether we have to do anything. Anyway, thanks for the comment, I appreciate the, yes, thank you.
I appreciate the fellow that's, let's see where you went, that came from Korea. Oh, thank you for coming to our meeting tonight. It's actually quite thoughtful of you to write to us and help us out, especially since that developer is working in your town. And it was clear to me when I read your email right away that the town of Cranston really let you down, really did, horribly. They just didn't do the job.
Okay. Yes, Joe.
I don't need 5 minutes.
No, this is a hearing. Okay.
You need 10, right, Joe?
Just let us know what pages you have questions.
Joe Moreau, Old Depot Road. I'm on page 3, item 1.2. This is a recommendation I would suggest. Page 3, 1.2. All electrical connections and distribution lines within the facility shall be underground unless physical constraints to the land make underground lines impossible or impractical. electrical equipment between the facility and the utility connection may be above ground if required by the utility. Now, I know on page 10, the enforcement piece of this is the building and zoning official. So I'd like to know who's going to decide whether it's impossible or impractical. My suggestion is it should state all electrical connections and distribution lines within the facility shall be underground, period. I feel that if you have a solar array and it's bad enough that you have to look at these solar panels. Now, Brushy Brook is a prime example. If they can't dig trenches because of the constraints of the land, now are the residents, the abutters, are they going to be looking at additional lines within that facility to get to the inverters, the transformers? How high up are those lines going to be? I think there should be something in there where we decide and not leave it up to the contractor or the developer.
The only thing I'll say on that is obviously we specified that we don't want any blasting. So, I understand where you're going with that, Joe, and we can certainly take that under advisement, but I think we have to be practical also. We're trying to make modifications to the ordinance, but that seems to be a little bit onerous, but anyway.
The other thing we can probably do, Joe, is the planning board can use our engineers to address that and make sure that it is not impossible or impractical. So I think we can use our own engineers through the planning board to make sure that occurs correctly.
We could also add to the end of that, Joe, as determined by the building inspector or the town engineer, one of the two. We can simply add those statements at the end, so it's not determined by the developer, it's determined by the town.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir. Right behind you. No, Eric. Right. Just let us know what page and what number you have questions on.
I'm Doug Harris, Deputy Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for your neighbor, the Narragansett Tribe. And I'm a preservationist for ceremonial landscapes, and I'd like to address page 5. Land clearing and environmental impacts. I'd like to include land clearing, environmental, and cultural impacts. In the spirit of the town, as it embraced the comprehensive plan, I'd like to just read this one paragraph. TCPs, that's traditional cultural properties, are reminders of the spiritual practices of native peoples that are considered by the tribes to be irreplaceable, and they may be threatened by development. There are places in Hopkinton that may be of ceremonial importance to the Narragansett Indian tribe. The town of Hopkinton will make efforts to work with the Narragansett Tribal Historic Preservation Office, NIPO, and the State of Rhode Island Preservation and Heritage Commission to identify and protect important ceremonial sites in town. I've heard no references at all to the ceremonial stones or the burials or the other traditional tribal sites that you have committed to work with the Narragansett tribe and the historic preservation of the state to deal with. This project, as I recall, you were informed by the developer that there was only one site and that they had walked the 358 acres and there was nothing else. Well, A, they don't have the expertise to make that determination, and what we would request is that there be a ceremonial stone landscape and historic preservation survey where the tribes can put with you in place a survey team that will examine those 350 acres and establish that there is nothing of significance to be impacted. We have no dog in the fight or horse in the race with regard to solar. We do have a great deal with regard to that which is of ceremonial significance to this tribe and other tribes in the area. So we would like to make sure that, one, the language for that section includes cultural, and that there be a stipulation that refers to the necessity for there to be an impact survey, so we can identify that which would be impacted, and they can have the opportunity to design around it.
Fair enough, Doug?
Thank you.
Doug, can you do me a favor? Can you submit to the clerk, I guess, what type of language you'd like to see in that, in the ordinance amendment?
I'd be happy to work.
Thanks a bunch. Okay. Yes?
Good evening. My name is Dan Hendrick, and I work for Clearway Energy, which is a solar developer. And just on a personal note, I have to say this is a fantastic exercise in democracy, and I really recognize all the tremendous work that went into this and all the debate over the many months that have taken place here. I wanted to just raise a few things. We're one of the larger developers in the country, so we've had a lot of experience in the field with some of these things. So I think I just wanted to flag a few things that might be worth your consideration and some things that could potentially have unintended consequences. So the first thing I saw was on page 3, number 1. This is about the potential to have allowing the planning board to increase the required building setbacks by up to 100%. Just on an operational level, I think you want to flag that for folks if, there's a large investment that has to go in to make a project work. Essentially 1,000 things have to come together to make it right. So if there's a way to let folks know or make it clear how that, under what considerations that 100% would be triggered, that would be really helpful, because I don't think anybody wants to waste the planning board's time, anything like that. If there's some real clarity into what that 100% is and how it's sort of judged and constituted. And from what I understand, the planning board may already have the authority to condition a permit that way. So if the setback is doubled, so for example on the issue of setbacks, if the double setback ultimately is conditioned by the planning board, we'd suggest that the prohibition of tree clearing in the setback areas only apply to the original. So in other words, when you come to work on a site, there's significant area that needs to be prepared for roads or electricity. If we're able to sort of keep the original setback, we would ask for that.
What page is that?
That is. Also on page 3, number 3, this is the requirement for the black vinyl coated fencing around the project.
Page 3, number 3?
Yeah, I think that's right.
There's only a 3.4.
There's a 3.4.
This is about here we go. I'm sorry, it's on page 3, 2.3. The ground level facility shall be enclosed by a vinyl coated black chain link perimeter fence. We've heard from some of our other developments that many of the neighbors find this unattractive. And in other cases, it's invited some vandalism. So I don't necessarily have an alternative to propose to you, but that's something that we've observed as far as that issue goes. And now I think it's on page 6. This is looks like it's number 2C under appurtenant structures, about 6 feet, yes. The requirement to screen appurtenant structures with plants at least 6 feet tall may result in a visual irregularity that draws attention to the solar facility rather than helping it to blend in. So if the goal is to do that, you may want to consider allowing a landscape architect to propose something that's visually pleasing to the planning board's eye, rather than having sort of a standardized height. Sorry about that. Rather than having sort of a standardized look, you may want to, empower the planning board to allow a landscape architect to propose a visual screen that would really make sense for the site. I think this is page 4, number 14. This is about the noise limitation, the 40 decibel issue. We would suggest that the noise limitation be explicitly with respect to decibels above the existing ambient sound. So if it's close to an expressway, you'll have a different experience. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for your consideration. The height requirement, I think this is on page 3, number 5, be measured. We would request that you amend it to note that the 12 feet is measured from the ground surface, as folks may do some kind of grading to work around that issue. That's on page 3, I think it's number 5.
Page 3, 4.5.
4.5, that's it. The maximum height shall be no greater than 12 feet measured from the ground surface. We would just recommend making that very clear so people don't try to do some kind of grading or other things to try to manipulate what the 12 feet is from. It just makes it very clear from a site preparation standpoint. And then lastly, I believe it's on page 8, with regards to decommissioning and removal of equipment. There's several instances where it describes equipment, but it doesn't make it clear that it's equipment that's owned by the project as opposed to utilities. So if National Grid owns a piece of equipment, we have no control over their equipment. And it's also possible that the transmission lines that they would put into service a project would later down the road actually service somebody else's property or home. So it's actually infused throughout that section. It talks about removing transmission and wires. We would request that you make it clear that it's owned by the project and not by the utility. So all non-utility owned structures, we just wouldn't have, that would have to be something that would work out with National Grid. We just wouldn't have any control over the timelines as far as that. So, great. Thanks for your consideration.
Thanks for your help there. Appreciate your insight. Okay. Yes, sir. We're not going to be here all night, okay? You submitted to the council several attachments already, right? It's just what you're going to go over tonight?
Public hearing.
I know, but is that what you're going over?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. It is a public hearing, right? You told someone else. Don't be limited to 5 minutes. It's a public hearing and it's...
We don't want to be redundant because you sent us information.
It's 8:50, okay? All right, first of all, I just want to say that I don't know how everyone else feels about this exercise, but there's an aspect of this going through all the fine print that's a little maddening. We kind of lost track of seeing the forest for the trees here, and maybe it's because we can't see the forest because we're cutting down all the trees in this process. But there's an underlying premise here and a history to this ordinance, which I think is relevant. A lot of this grew out of this workshop, January 9th, 2017. I think it was a joint workshop with the planning board and the town council, or it may have just been the town council. But the stated purpose of the workshop was this. The workshop was scheduled to discuss options that the town might consider in facilitating developers and property owners wanting to consider installing commercial solar arrays on parcels of land zoned RFR 80. Now, almost the entire thrust of this solar ordinance is about how to regulate the installation of solar panels on land that's zoned RFR 80, which right now is residential, and in the zoning district use table prohibits installation of commercial installations. Now, the reason that's relevant to all of this is there have been a few things that kind of flew by the radar here. One of them is, just to take a very minor one, one of the comments that I offered was that on these setbacks, rather than considering a doubling of the RFR 80 setback after you rezone it to be a commercial property, rather than using any kind of metric that previously obtained for the RFR 80 and doubling it, I had suggested that you just say that that could be adjusted at by the planning board. And the reason I said that, it wasn't so long ago, we were talking about the Woodville-Alton Road project, and the developer was offering a 700-foot setback from some of these properties. The RFR 80 setback is, I think, 40 feet for the side setback and 50 feet for the rear setback. And most people's expectation, or at least the zoning code's expectation of an RFR 80 parcel is that the building that would be set back 40 feet would probably be a barn, not a chain link fence. So I don't think the existing metric for setbacks has any bearing after you convert the property. Secondly, you're doubling, again, you're using the underlying metric for a rural property and you're applying a formula of doubling it to doubling the coverage ratio to 30%. 30% coverage on a 100-acre property is 30 acres of solar panels. Okay, that's just a vast amount. And I know that Councilor Thompson, for example, has said in numerous meetings that she considers this to be very restrictive, and she has said that she's had conversations with numerous developers and that she believes that the 30% ratio might really calm down all the speculation in solar activity that we have in this town, because it might make it uneconomic. I would just point out that the two proposals in front of us, Brushy Brook.
Eric, we cannot talk about specific projects. Talk about.
I'm giving you an example of a coverage ratio. I am talking about a coverage ratio. So let's just talk about, okay, I won't name it. Let's take a theoretical project with a 350-acre footprint on a 358-acre parcel that has 122 acres of solar panels on it. That's a coverage ratio of 34%. So if a proposal like that came before the town council, say, next Monday, and the coverage ratio was 34%, I don't think that anybody would argue that if the developer had to reduce that to 30%, that he would abandon his project. We just had a project go before the planning board, which is not before you in these hearings, Atlantic Solar. They proposed 10 acres of solar panels on a 30-acre parcel. That's 33%. It's just completely false that a 30% coverage ratio is going to make these commercial projects uneconomic. This is just a back door. It's not going to become a limitation. It's going to become the new standard, 30% coverage ratio. And the coverage ratio is just a massive footprint. I think that just needs to be said. Now, I was also struck by a comment that the chairman of the planning board made when he was discussing the evolution of this ordinance and where the 30% coverage ratio came from. And his comment was that the planning board asked themselves what might be the expectations of residents for a coverage ratio after the property is rezoned. Well, that's the wrong question. The expectation of a resident who owns residential property in an RFR 80 zone is that the property across the street from him won't be rezoned because it's residential property. I have to laugh. I'm looking at Tom Buck, who used to be in my homeowners association, right? Tom, did you buy your property thinking, well, I think a good ratio of solar panels, across the street from me would be 30% if they ever rezone. I mean, come on.
I was gonna put a window right in your back.
Right. So, I mean, it's just absurd. Nobody buys their house in a residential zone thinking a reasonable expectation, if it's a 100-acre parcel, is 30 acres of solar panels. There's another issue that is just a huge failing in these ordinances, is we've talked about how every project has to be enclosed by a 6-foot chain link fence, right? And I heard mind-numbing detail about little plants and big plants and arborvitae, and maybe it should be mountain laurel and everything else. But the real punchline was that after a year, the developer is not responsible. Yeah. And these projects are going to be there for 30 years, and about 2 years later, I'm going to be looking at dead plants and a chain link fence across the street from me. There's nothing in this ordinance that protects anyone. Let's double the setbacks, okay? So let's say I live on some road and across the street is this solar installation and it's 30 acres. You doubled the setback to 80 feet from 40. Hallelujah. Then you planted some arborvitae that died after a year. And now 100 feet across the lot line, I'm looking at a 6-foot chain link fence and 30 acres of solar panels. That's not reasonable for anybody that lives in a residential zone, right? Then I finally have to say, I'm struck by the fact that, oh, there was another comment by the chairman of the planning board, really picking on you tonight, Al, we're on where you are. So Al made the totally reasonable observation that, look, I mean, we have projects that I won't name that will probably be heard next Monday, where there's a huge fear. There's a huge fear that there are lots of abutters who registered their approval because they're afraid of, quote unquote, something worse. And the something worse is a housing subdivision. And if you roll the bulldozers and clear all the trees and prepare it all for homes, and then solar isn't supported by all the same subsidies 20 years from now that you get today, they're going to get exactly what they're feared. There's just one problem, though, is it's commercial property now, and you would have to rezone it back to residential to even build those houses in the first place. But nobody wins because they get the houses they didn't want, and we don't reforest or anything. And that leads to my final observation. In that workshop on January 9th, 2017, Councilor Thompson unveiled her plan and her set of proposed criteria for, the Trojan horse we're going to wheel into RFR 80 property to, make it possible to develop it. And the cornerstone of that plan was this requirement that all of this property automatically revert to RFR 80 after you convert it from residential to commercial. That, we know now, is illegal. But I'm looking at this, and I'm wondering, well, if every member of the town council has promised that this property will automatically revert to RFR 80, and we would never, ever, ever permanently zone it as commercial, right? And you now know that it's illegal to stipulate that it automatically revert. A, why are you doing that if you know that? Or if you don't believe it, you disagree with me, why is there not a provision in here, in your ordinance, that says when you rezone RFR 80 property, it will automatically revert? If you're promising everyone that's part of your program, why not put it in this ordinance? Where is it?
That's a good point.
Right? So
That's why I'm here.
right. So, well, I can tell you why you can't put it in there because it's illegal. But but if you're going to disagree with me, then why doesn't it find its way in here? It's a glaring omission.
Good point. Okay,
All
thank
right,
you.
thank you.
Eric, what was the court that you're telling me it's illegal and you said right?
Here, I have it. I'll give you a copy of the Supreme Court decision, all right?
Thanks. Yes, sir. Harvey.
Harvey Buford, Pasture Lake. I just wanted to bring up something. I couldn't quite figure out where it should go in this ordinance, but there's a possibility to have both incentives and disincentives to guide where solar projects go. And I know this ordinance is really written just for projects where there's a rezone from RFR 80 to commercial and manufacturing. But even in that case, I think it would work quite well. So I kind of have a little short list of some incentives and disincentives. A location incentive. If a project is proposed in a gravel bank or possibly a quarry, a capped landfill, brownfields, parking lots, there would be a 50% increase that could be allowed in the size of that. So you take the 30%, you can increase that to 45%, because we would like to see, those are the locations we would like to see the solar projects go. If you do it in other places, there would be a decrease. If you or do a project and you're proposing it in prime agricultural soils, or soils of statewide importance, or the unfragmented forest, which the state recently kind of was categorizing as 250 acres, and they made a map that showed where those areas were, then there would be a 50% decrease, which would bring you down from 30% to 15%. So that would be a fairly straightforward way, I think, to guide these projects to areas that are good, or the best choice for the town. And then when you look at the big picture of the project too, if you can get more efficient panels and more efficient project designs, then I think there should be incentives there as well. The typical panels being built today are 17–18% efficiency. If you have tracking panels, which is about 80% of the panels built erected in the United States in the last 2 years, that's about a 30% increase in efficiency. Now, when you look at the big picture, if you go to more efficient design, then the total amount of acreage that will be required, let's say in the state of Rhode Island, to have solar panels will be greatly reduced. And also the amount of taxes that will be garnered per acre will go up. So I think we should have an incentive there. My arbitrary number would be that for module efficiency, if you go above the 18%, then you would get 1% lot coverage increase for every 1% increase in project capacity. I have some specific notes and stuff that go with that. It's how you determine that. And also solar storage. If you have a solar battery system, or I don't think we have the possibility of pumped water storage here, but you know, if there's ways with a solar battery to increase it, the same thing is that is more beneficial to society, to be able to use the solar and store that energy for a few hours so it's available that night. So those are things that when you look at the big scheme, those would be useful, because right now the incentives that exist in the state are to go buy the cheap land in Hopkinton and put up lots of solar, and don't worry about how many acres it is, because the land's cheap enough. Now, here's some ways that I'd like to see this ordinance give some flexibility so that we direct that development to the best choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. We've got Chairman of the Conservation Commission. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, to the Town Council. This is my first time here. I'm a little bit nervous, so bear with me, please.
Take your time.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My name's Luann McCormick, and I live off of Skunk Hill Road. And I just feel strongly that any further zoning changes for the use of residential land for solar should be brought to the attention of the Hopkinton citizenship as a whole, not just to the abutters. These proposed changes are really substantive, and it's changing the comprehensive plan, and then it's ultimately can affect the town, the way that the town looks and feels. So it isn't just affecting the people that are directly abutting these projects, it's affecting the whole town. And you know, when I heard, you know, I've heard a lot of information tonight about how it's going to affect the developers. But like when I look at the 30%, you know, coverage, the ratio coverage, I totally agree. I mean, 30% of 100 acres is a lot of land with glass on it. It's a lot of trees that are going to come down. And then when I read the bit about the fact that it's 40 decibels, not to exceed 40 decibels at the property line, why should somebody in a residential zone have to listen to any decibels at the property line? Especially given the fact that whatever those decibels are more than likely going to be a constant. They're going to be a hum. They're going to be something that those people did not have when the trees were there. So, you know, the other thing is that the idea about the historic properties and to save the views if possible, well, of course it's possible. Just don't put solar panels there. The case studies for the solar siting information, public draft number 2, that was dated August 22nd, 2018. What I find very interesting on here is that none of the 4 case studies were on residential property. They're all on commercial property. So I think that when you take a look at what's happening here and the fact that this is basically like the Wild Wild West. There's a lot of changes happening very quickly in a town where clearly you've got a lot of residents very concerned about it. And when I take a look at the fact that there hasn't even been any attempt to put together maybe a group of the council, the planning board, the zoning board, and the residents to kind of rehash the comprehensive plan again and say, you know what? This is what we're trying to do. We know why you're trying to do it. We know about the tax dollars. But putting it in the middle of residential without honestly considering what that, opening that door is going to entail, I mean, there are places that solar will work, absolutely. Places where you don't have to clear cut trees. Places where they're not close to people's houses. People where they're not going to be in line of sight of them. I totally agree with what Eric talked about, which is the fact that, so why even bother to have the developers put up any screening at all? If within a year, they have no responsibility. They should have a responsibility for the life of the project. Okay? They're going to be making a fortune on this. They can buy new trees. So, you know, and the fact that the threat of hundreds of houses is misleading at best. Some of the land being considered is not easily developable. I didn't say that right. So it would most likely remain as open land and trees if it's not turned into a sea of glass. So this isn't a question of either or. It isn't. It's a question of, you know, keeping a responsible planning, of responsibly bringing in solar where solar makes sense, where you don't have to clear cut, where there is the availability of even some natural screening. You know, where you can actually make the trees work to the benefit rather than take them down. You know, I just think that the onus of responsibility should remain firmly on the landowner and the developer to be able to show the residents of this town why it is in their best interest to have them come in and do this in our town. And the fact that, and also in closing, and I appreciate your time, just because somebody has a residentially zoned property that they want to cash in on doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best place to put solar in this town. And I just think that if we can all take a deep breath and take a look at what's at stake here, And the fact that the comprehensive plan was put there for a reason, and there's a reason why people are out and upset about this, and that's the fact that this has the propensity, the possibility of really changing this town and this town's feel. So, thank you for your time.
Did you have a question?
Very short. You know, the 30% thing, actually, when I thought the whole thing through, all you have to do is look at, for instance, one of the farms, and they're putting up a half acre or 1 acre on the land, and they're making it work. So, I mean, that's an example of they're realizing a profit, which we wanted the farmers to be able to do, and it's half acre or 1 acre, and they're making it work. I also wanted to point out that the town council has approved 2 that was one sandbank, one that was a gravel area, and the other 2 large proposals, the one on 191 and the one on Main Street near Exit 1. And all the others, Reynolds and Arcadia Road, and all of those other little projects all over, if they're not screened or whatever, it had nothing to do with the council. It was the planning board that did all those others. And so people are seeing these projects. The ones that we're doing, we're putting specific, that we did do, had specific stipulations on it. And they can't do a lot of the things that we don't want them to do. So we did put a lot of stipulations on. But all of those other ones that you drive through town and you see them, that's not what we want. And that's why we're here tonight, to try to make this ordinance better, so it protects everybody, but it also enhances the town in other ways.
Thanks, Sylvia, sir.
Well, Paul Sakowicz again. I'm not elegant and I'm not long-winded, but I have a few things I'd like to say. You said something about chemicals.
Right.
I'm with you. But far more chemicals are used on lawns than are used on commercial properties. When I came here, hardly any of these houses are around. And I'm not against building houses, people gotta live somewhere. But some of these houses are on hay fields I used to cut. I think the fields looked a lot nicer. I don't think anybody should have a right to say what something looks like on somebody else's property. I don't have a right to say what your house looks like. Maybe I don't like the style. I got 63 acres of land. I don't intend on clear cutting it, but if I want to, why shouldn't I be able to? I pay the taxes on it. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Not commercial land.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Anything else on this? Yes, John? Do you have any helpful hints on the ordinance amendments, Alex, would be helpful?
I just got a question. My name's Alexander Poulos, 200 Woody Hill Road. So how do you guys attempt to address the abutting property owners for their property loss? As far recently, my property just got reevaluated and it went up. And that was as per the comprehensive plan. And now, all of a sudden, if this Brushy Brook thing comes in next to me, my property values are gonna go down. I mean, have you guys thought about that? Is there any way of addressing that? That's the first question. The second one is, if you make his property commercial, make my property commercial. That way there it's even. I can always sell it for commercial. I'll put up buildings, I'll put up, places. You want revenue. That's what it seems like all the town council wants. Kind of reminds me of a story about a guy that went into a marketplace and saw a table full of gold, grabbed the gold and ran with it. And when the authorities caught him, they asked him, "Why did you steal the gold in front of all those people?" He said, "I never saw the people. All I saw was the gold." That's what we're doing here. All you're looking at is money. You don't even care about the ramifications on what we're putting on. I mean, there's people that were neighbors that don't even talk anymore because of what you've done.
See, government has no right to get involved in this. Government's like a referee in a hockey game. All it does is make sure justice reigns. So my question really is, if you're doing this for the town, that's eminent domain. You need to buy my property or something because you're putting a commercial power station. I didn't move next to a commercial power station. That's what you're putting in next to my house. I want you guys down in your backyard.
Any questions about the amendments on your end would be helpful?
Sure.
If you had.
Well, I don't have a list of, hi, I'm John Pennypacker, I live along Foster Road North. I just wanted to go, I don't have a list of all the amendments that you made this evening, but I have a list of what's here and what I agree to remove. If I start right, sort of on page 2, under the exemptions, it allows the planning board the authority to waive or modify provisions for specific properties. I'd rather see the planning board be given greater latitude. You can always overrule the planning board. You don't have to listen to what they say. So, oh, that's gone. Great. But I do think a statement that specifically allows the planning board some latitude would probably go a long way, because one of the issues that I've witnessed on the planning board with the existing 1-acre lots is, all the people came in from the farm viability ordinance asking to put in an acre of solar, which is about 10%. I think at the most, it might even be 8% of total coverage, was to preserve the rest of the farm. And the planning board didn't have any guidance. They're going by this and that. Well, I guess they have to put a fence around it. So I appreciate the effort to add clarity and to make it more plain for everyone involved, but I also think that empowering the planning board to control the projects and to make decisions and to adjust as appropriate goes towards what the planning board is supposed to do. On page 3, number 2.3, it's to prevent unauthorized access, there has to be a fence. I understand the financer might require a fence. I understand the developer might want a fence. I don't understand why the town is mandating a 6-foot fence. Safety. Is the town liable for something that happens on private property? Because, well, I don't want to think about it either, but I guess when I look at, well, for example, there's a solar installation at the Charity School. It's not surrounded by a 6-foot fence. There's plenty of kids around it. I'm just, sure.
You're saying no fence?
I don't think the town needs to require it by law. That's, if somebody wants it. Oh, this is by law, right? Yeah.
But I think it's safety, more safety.
Okay, I would expect an insurance company to require that more than the town. I don't know that it's the town's responsibility to ensure that, but that's, take it or leave it. I also see that the maximum height for ground-mounted solar. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 4.5, is that? I think it's the number incorrectly. The maximum height is 12 feet. I appreciate where that's coming from, and I understand that it's to sort of minimize the visibility from a distance, but it also limits the possible uses which you can do with ground-mounted solar. You can't put anything under it. I can't put ground-mounted solar over a parking lot because it'll exceed 12 feet. Can't. It will be against the rules. So I think removing that provision, or again delegating that to the planning board as to what's appropriate for the site, I think would be a step in the right direction. I also want to talk about coverage on page 4, 13. This is what's been talked about a lot tonight with 30%. 30% of a 2-acre lot, just to put that in, let me back up. My house is approximately 20 feet by 30 feet, so that's a 600 square foot footprint, about. On a 2-acre parcel, that would be 20 houses, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. You'd be putting a house on every 10th of an acre. pretty crowded by Hopkinton standards. So I think that that's pretty crowded for solar panels just as well as would be for houses or anything else in these residential properties. And I also think it should be buildable, because I can't put 20 houses on non-buildable land. So I don't know why other people would get the same benefit. It strikes me as a very peculiar number and very peculiar reasoning. On the next page 5, at the top item, which is labeled as number 7, it says flat roof elements shall not have equipment or support structures that are visible from public streets, public facilities, or neighboring properties, and shall be placed as close to the roof plane as possible. Why are we trying to preserve the beauty of asphalt shingles? I mean, who cares if I can see solar panels on a roof, on any building? I don't think we necessarily need that. I think it's okay. Roofs aren't particularly beautiful. I don't think solar panels make them uglier, personally. I also think that solar panels on a flat roof being angled in such a way as to not exceed the maximum building height is just redundant. You've already said that they can't exceed the maximum building height. So this is just saying it again for people with flat roofs. And I'll go back and I'll echo something that Ms. Williams from the Planning Board mentioned regarding chemicals. Oh, sorry, page 7, operation and maintenance plan, which is number 2. What about the equipment used to mow the grass? Requires gasoline and oil. Does that count as using chemicals on the property?
That's a stretch.
Well, yes, but I guess coming up with that language is tricky, right? So people clean their windows with vinegar, and that's, a chemical. So it's acid. What else was I here? I think that might be it for my list. So I hope you'll take these ideas into consideration. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. Thanks, John.
John, may I
Sure.
please?
Wait, can I mention a couple of things here? I agree that the arborvitae or whatever they plant around these installations is part of the installation. If they're going to maintain the grass underneath the solar panels, they should maintain the trees far longer than a year. I think they should maintain it for the extent of the installation. If it's 20 years, maintain the trees for 20 years. You're going to cut the grass, maintain the trees. The trees die, replace them. That's number one. Let me tell you about the fence too. I agree with John just now. The fences shouldn't be our problem. They don't want to put a fence up, hey, and you know what, for the protection of teenagers are going to climb over a fence if they want to get in there. I don't know why they want to, but they will. Believe me, they will. Maybe they have a beer party at an installation. I can't imagine that. And then I want to make a general statement about this whole situation. I just don't understand that the town can't say, unless for extraordinary circumstances, this town will not be changing residential land to commercial for solar panels.
Any other public comments for this hearing? Yes, Sharon. Come on. You gotta come on. Senator Luther, you can come first, Luther.
Oh, Sharon should go.
Well, the way you have to look at it, I actually have something right in mind. Isn't going to be all right.
Mr. Davis, can you repeat that, please? We couldn't hear you.
I have something to say that's not going to be all negative on solar panels. As a couple of you know, we have been canvassing the town. And one of the things that we noted that does not seem to be covered in our solar ordinance is there are a number of properties that have solar panels installed where the solar panels are not on trellises on the ground.
We're not watching?
They're not on trellises on the ground. These properties are powering equipment in homes with a solar panel set on a pole, a tree. It looks like a Christmas tree. I can't give you the, off the top of my head, I can't give you the exact street address, but this took place, there were 3 of them on Benner Hill and Highview. And that's not covered anywhere in what we've been talking about.
Small versions of what we're talking about.
Yes.
Thank you, Luther.
Anything else? Yes, Sharon?
Sharon Davis, Cedarwood Lane. It seems that since this summer, we have really been going crazy. And if in fact the planning board, who has the most knowledge of these things, is not going to approve any residential RFR 80 project to be changed to solar, to commercial, so you can put solar on it, then I'm questioning, why are we going crazy with this solar ordinance? The question is, does the solar ordinance supersede the comprehensive plan, or does the comprehensive plan supersede the solar ordinance? And that's my question.
Thanks. Okay. Well, to answer your question, the solar ordinance was jointly crafted by the planning board and town council, and the comprehensive plan does include solar in residential areas. You just have to read it. Thank you.
Only on rooftops.
No, it's in the comp plan. You got to read it in its entirety. It's there.
I read it at the last hearing.
I read it too.
It was, Tom quoted the exact verbiage in the comp plan. Sylvia, okay. Sean Henry, our assistant planner.
Thank you, Frank. Good evening. I just had one minor sort of record-keeping thing. As we're getting a handle on the projects that have been approved and receiving their financial securities. As you may not know, these projects are sort of changing hands several times after approval. So I thought it might be in the town's best interest to have the terms of the financial security recorded in the land evidence records, as to make that clear, because we're getting between planning and finance and building and zoning, we're trying to get together a system of how to maintain these sort of for the long term, because they're going to go away for a long period of time, and most of us aren't going to be here when they have to be dealt with. So recording them in the land evidence, that way in the future it's clear under that property what the terms of those are.
Makes perfect sense, John.
Yep.
I guess did we not address that in our financial security section? I don't think we did. All right, well, we can, but we're not going to keep the interest on it. Okay.
Oh, Joe. I just have a question. Are we going to have a public forum after this, so I can ask one question about Stubtown Road? Or can I ask the question now?
Well, we're on the topic of solar, right? I mean, why don't you ask now?
I'll leave all the paper behind.
Thank you.
I know it came up at the Brushy Brook hearing about Stubtown Road, and the attorney was a little confused with Stubtown Road and Brushy Brook as far as hooking up to the three-phase power. He didn't know where it was, and Sylvia had corrected him to the fact that the distance was so far. And I know that Sylvia has kind of led the charge with this solar. And my question would be to Sylvia, has there been any recent contact, whether it's email, most people don't call each other anymore, whether it's email or text messages, has there been any recent contact to you, whether it's an email form, as far as an interest in Stubtown Road and using that for solar.
And just to clarify, that's a former town dump, I guess, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Recent within the last 3-4 weeks.
Yeah, okay.
Just to reiterate, we've talked about this before, but a few years back, I heard that a westerly lawyer was going to come into town and he was going to propose a zone change. Or, well, I should say he wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he wanted to, we heard that he wanted to put in a large solar farm on residential land. And that was when we heard the rumor. We all know what happened with that. Yeah, oh yeah. So what I knew I needed to do was ask the town council to get to this ordinance and adopt it. And we didn't even have an ordinance, and we knew somebody was going to come in town. If we didn't even have this document, we'd be like Cranston or something, you know. So that's why we got this done, not to promote solar, but to protect us from solar. That was the whole idea. So.
Can we answer the question?
So the question is, have I been contacted by anybody? I have been contacted by Clearway. All 5 of us were contacted in writing by Clearway. And the gentleman spoke tonight. I'm sorry, it's in our packet. If you missed it, I can't help that. But we received this document dated October 2nd, 2018 in our packet. So it wasn't last week, it was just after October 2nd. So, yes, I've been contacted by them.
You have.
No, the whole town council, we received this.
I'm a little confused from back here. I got my glasses on.
Oh, okay. I received a document from Clearway, as every single member of the town council should have noticed in their packet, and Tom says he noticed. There was a document here that went over our ordinance, and they had comments to make, and the gentleman's here tonight. And that's who I've been contacted with. Not contacted personally, but just by a paper document that we all received. So I haven't talked on the phone with him, or have I met with him. However, Frank and I did sit down and talk to Jason Teff. He's interested in a future project. So I did talk to him, but it had nothing to do with the solar ordinance. So does that help, Joe?
No.
All right, what are you looking for?
Stubtown Road.
Oh, Stubtown Road. Oh, and the Teff people, Jason Teff, I think he was interested in the Stubtown proposal, I thought, but he didn't talk. The bottom line is, way back, before any solar projects, anything came into town, we had a meeting with the town manager. I was there. Tom was there. Vinny, what's his name? Nacarado, the lawyer from Westerly, who was going to propose a large project, we thought. And he came, and Tony Belvicario, if I'm pronouncing it right, and he was there because we were interested in developing the Stubtown property for the town, and we're still interested in that. And so we did have that meeting, and it was in the newspaper, what we talked about. We also looked at the property behind the town hall, and there's 19 acres, or 17 that might have been used, and I think we're going to just leave that alone, because you never know what you might need. So, but we do want to do the Stubtown landfill.
So you can keep yours, but we can't keep ours. What?
Okay, thanks, Joe. So you get your answer.
Sylvia never got it.
No, I didn't get. Did you receive an email?
Did you receive an email
Recently,
anyone
from
regarding Stubtown
Stubtown
Road?
No.
No.
Okay, she said no.
Said no.
All right.
Did anybody?
I never got it, Sylvia.
I didn't. Oh, you mean Clearway?
Not my
So we're
packet.
not talking about that. We're not talking. Okay. Anyone else have any public comments? Mr. Stevens? Sorry, I missed you. I'm sorry.
hear a lot about the town wanting more money and against profit. That's why we all had a job. I'm old enough, so I'll probably be able to live here the rest of my life. But every house goes in, taxes are gonna go up. So I think the town is good to look for revenue, so that people can afford to live here the rest of their life.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Justin Bentley, 138 Maxon Hill Road. Start off by thanking you for all the ordinance work. I know language can be, it was a little thick, it can be kind of tricky. Some of the vagueness that was in there with maybes or least restrictive, et cetera, some of the language. So to shore that up was a good job, despite the fact that it's still, I don't really agree with the rezoning. Obviously, it's goes against the wishes of most of the people that are in the room, I think. But I just have a, through my own ignorance, a question, actually two questions. And I may be wrong on this. There are 4 properties that have already been rezoned, correct? Right. So none of the things in this ordinance would be retroactive, correct? Okay. So those 4 properties are now just the redhead stepchild of the town. There's no, I mean, they've been approved, but we've heard changes in the ordinance language. There's no hope of any changes in the plan at all. Okay, just had a question.
We realized, again, my initial thoughts when we created this, and Al Diorio said it pretty well, is we tried to create an ordinance. We put our best foot forward and we realized there was mistakes with it. So that's why we're here tonight, to try and modify that. So we're trying to entertain suggestive language to change and accommodate everyone involved as best we can. So.
Just one more quick question. If hypothetically there were problems in the ones that were already approved and they had to be revisited, would this then apply to them?
Kevin, I don't believe so.
Generally speaking, any new law that's passed, whether it's an ordinance or a statute at the state level, is not retroactive and cannot.
Okay, I didn't specify clearly enough. For example, I won't name the project, I don't know where I'll do that, but one in particular that, as Mr. Bibler spoke to, that was done, probably the elephant in the room, not fully legally. If that were to be the case and had to be revisited and everything was thrown out, started from scratch, does the ordinance would then apply to that?
I can't answer a hypothetical
Okay,
question.
all right, thank you. Just asking. Thanks.
Barbara?
Even though the 4 that we have approved, 1 on 91, and then 2 are on gravel banks, and then there's the one at exit 1. It still has to go in front of the planning board. You are certainly all welcome there. They will still address a lot of these concerns, and even in the writing of the ordinance, we covered some of these already. But the planning board does have some maneuverability, and they will use everything they have to keep these projects as tight and as effective as they can. Do go to the planning board.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir.
Jeff Light, 43 Barstow Drive. In the postponed meeting last Monday, there was reference to a Sage consulting firm. I would just like to draw to the busybodies, not busybodies, but busy people on board, that if you go to their website and you click on renewable energy, excuse me, it clearly states, we are experts in helping energy companies circumvent regulations and environmental concerns. Just wanted to make that public. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Because we got a police contract to approve. They're dying back there. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lynn Upcare. I'm a resident at 100 Maxon Hill Road.
I will say for the record, I received one notice about the Maxon Hill project. I went to the meeting, and it was not on the agenda. I never received any more notices about this project again. Next thing I know, I'm getting a letter that's certified that has an enormous solar farm on it. The size of it was stunning. It took my breath away. That was ridiculous. It's, sorry. If it's true that this retroactive thing is illegal, and then we're stuck paying for legal fees, what does that do to all this extra money from the solar farms? I'm just curious.
And you're talking about Maxon Hill that was approved?
Yep.
Okay.
It was approved, and I
You never got
received zero notice about that.
And you're in a butter?
As in a butter.
Okay.
Okay, can I also have, I'm sorry, you, Mrs. Cavallo, you spoke about the state wanting to know about historic sites. Is that a stipulation? The state of Rhode Island. Is that necessary for any building?
No, the people from the state came down to tell us about, some of the regulations they were proposing for solar, and we had already done usually 80% of what they were recommending because it's not our first rodeo. But one of the things they did say is specifically ban them in historic districts and with historic views. And I thought that was a very good point that we hadn't thought of.
It is a very good point. I'd like to point out that Tomahawk Indian Shelter is on Maxon Hill Road. It's a registered historic site.
Anyone else? Okay, we need a motion to close or continue the hearing, folks.
Nick, let everybody know this. We want to, I just make it real quick.
Yeah, I want to make a motion to close the hearing because the sooner we get these, we don't know if somebody's going to come in and have a solar project tomorrow. Doesn't mean it's going to prove it, but we want to limit them, and this ordinance changes will make a difference. And we need to get to the point where the sooner we adopt these changes or add any more changes in, the sooner we get that done, then any new solar projects that come in would have to adhere to this. So we want to make sure we get it done sooner and fast. Now that we've gone over everything, I hope we can adopt it. Because we can always change it again in the future.
Okay, so the procedure is we either continue the hearing and factor in the comments, suggestions made today, or we close it and set a date for a decision. But all right, it's just one person. Sylvia just made that comment, so.
I would like to continue the hearing because we made quite a number of changes, and I think it would be beneficial for everyone to take a look at the new written form. Sylvia is correct. We need to pass it as quickly as we can because it does give us some protection. However, there are changes that were made. They were specific, and some of them are substantial. So I would like just to pause the hearing and not close it. I would like to continue the hearing until date certain.
You guys control how fast these solar projects are approved. Right. So by holding this open, all of it's going to have, you guys are just going to have to do a little more work at the end of the day. Okay? You guys are approving these at your own speed.
Once it's brought forward, it can be brought forward just to the planning board. And if we haven't even seen it yet, it will be grandfathered. Anything is brought forward.
I don't think the planning board is going to be able to
so this doesn't
that way.
Jim, can you explain how that works?
The grandfather.
Once they
Receipt of an application.
You receive an application, it's grandfathered.
It's locked in at whatever.
That's really a right. As soon as we receive an application at the clerk's office, then it stays with the current regulations.
Right, but this, we're talking about resident, we're talking about the RFI, we're not talking about the planning board's authority to approve a solar farm on We're talking about you guys changing the zoning. So you guys control the rate that that moves at. So if we rush through all of this, and all of your i's and t's are dotted, but ours are left on the roll, then you can see as many solar farm applications as you want, and you can approve as many as you want, if you're allowed to do the zoning change.
We either close it or we continue it. There's only two options. So if we continue it and factor in the suggested changes today and work on it continually, or we close it and make a decision. So I'm hearing folks may want to just have it continued so that we can make the necessary changes that everyone's suggesting. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. Jim, do you have something to say?
If you are continuing the ordinance revision, is that going to postpone Russian Brook again?
No, it has nothing to do with,
But today, we postponed Russian Brook.
the lead attorney wasn't here, they continued it. So that'll be continued to the 29th. That's what, Jim, you want to say something else?
Well,
I only want to say that I believe Sylvia is correct, that it's really in the town's best interest to get this ordinance adopted as soon as possible, because as soon as someone submits a proposal to change the zone to the clerk's office, our solicitor has ruled that they are grandfathered under the ordinance that we're attempting to change tonight. So it's really in all of your interest, if you want to put some controls on these things, as Sylvia said, is to get this ordinance in the form that the town wants it in and get it adopted as soon as possible. It's my understanding that another solar developer today submitted a new request to the town clerk's office to rezone, that's going to entail a rezone of property. So the longer we waste time over this unnecessarily, the more we're going to be at risk.
All right, so we have a motion to either continue or close it. What do you guys think?
Make a motion to continue the hearing.
Second question, just to try to make it clear for everyone. Once someone has an application
Into the clerk's office, yes.
that requires a zoning change, and the zoning change is denied.
Unnecessarily.
By the planning board.
By the planning board, by whoever has the authority to say, no, we're not changing the zoning.
Right.
Then what? Are they still grandfathered?
No, they're dead.
So Tom, you made a motion to continue. Was that seconded? Yes. Okay, motion made to continue was made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Okay, so it'll be continued to factor in all these suggested changes. So, thank you, folks. We got a little bit left on our agenda. Okay, next on our agenda. Hey folks, I just got a few more things I got to straighten out on the agenda for you, please. Thank you. Consent agenda, approved town council meeting minutes of October 1st, 2018. Accept the following monthly financial activity reports. Town clerk approved refunds resulting from overpayment 2018 real property tax and motor vehicle phase-out program, approve abatement resulting in a real property adjustment stated by the tax assessment. Seconded, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Folks, I'm going to finish the meeting, please. I'd appreciate it. Okay, first item under new business. Number 1, discuss, consider, and vote to approve the tentative agreement between the town of Hopkinton and local 808 of Leona, which represents the police dispatch and animal control officer union employees from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2021. Motion made and seconded. I have financial impact that I'd like to just read so we can get that into the record. So the proposed dispatch union labor agreement for July 1st to June 30th, 2021. The total impact for the 3 years is $67,728, and the raises were 1% first year, 2% second year, 3% third year, for a 6% total over 3 years. So we had a motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on that dispatch? Having heard none, all those in favor? Aye, thank you. Next is our friends in the back, Police Department. Discuss, consider, and vote to approve a tentative agreement between the Town of Hopkinton and Local 498 of the IDPO, which represents the Police Department's union employees from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2021. Okay, motion made and seconded, and I'm just going to read this financial impact statement given to me by Finance. The 3-year financial impact to the Town of Hopkinton for the police union is $168,486. The raises over 3 years, again, first year is 1%, second year is 2%, third year is 3%. So any questions? I guess we had a motion made. Yes, Cindy? Okay, motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay. Last public forum. Oh, gee, this problem.
Let's go.
The guy from Cranston, what are you doing here?
Come on, drive.
Glad we don't live in Cranston.
Just a couple of things. Your ordinance in place in Cranston, the neighbors are a lot different than now.
Do they have an ordinance in Cranston about this? Do they even have one?
Steve Typus and I put together one that was very minimal.
See, there you go.
The problem was after the fact, the planning department wanted nothing to do with it. For example, just panels and wires. What do we need an ordinance for? So the developer had to agree to it. It'd be very minimal. So, but just a story, there was a candidates forum last week. There was a candidates forum Thursday night by Cranston Herald. And it was the at-large city council members. The city council president was one of those. So I asked if they were in favor of a stronger, more comprehensive ordinance like this. And he apologized for his vote, allowing solar in residential areas. I was amazed. He apologized to me personally for doing it. And at that hearing we had for the 243 trees I wanted to cut down, another one of the Republicans who voted for the ordinance as well, said he was sick to his stomach. So there's been a change in Cranston going on. It's not going to say, it's not going to say my neighborhood, but maybe I'll come back next week and warn you all about Southern Sky. Just as a, they're supposed to be. Some of which are not down to be. But that's the problem. When they passed the ordinance, the zoning change, they had no idea this was going to happen. Because our planning department was so deficient and so negligent in what they did. But as far as Southern Sky, just give you an idea of what they do. We came home from Thanksgiving, we got Thanksgiving last year, we came home and found flyers and tucked in our back doors for A1 blasting, telling us they were going to start blasting the next week. They never told us before that. And they told the property owner, because it's in the lease agreement they signed 2 months before. And if you go back and look at the solar description for the property, it's right there in the solar description. Blasting may be required. They never told the planning commission, they never told us. I don't know what they told the planning department. That went on for 4 months. About a month and a half of blasting, 4 months of quarry operations. With gravel crushers going, rock crushers going full steam all day long.
If you put ice cream in front of a 4-year-old, what are they going to do?
They need it.
That's right. So it's up to the parents not to give a big lot of ice cream. Crown of Cranston is allowed to develop to just go
do
whatever they want.
They did. They clear cut everything from boundary to boundary, excluding the wetland buffers. They've damaged wetlands, which they've documented by DEM and me. One wetland is filling in with erosion coming off the site. We got another set of wetlands and a brook that's orange from what's probably a severe concentration of iron bacteria. It just happens to be draining this very site that was blasted and quarried for 4 months.
Iron bacteria?
Yeah, so it turned the creek into an orange slime, putrid orange slime, like 600 feet
extreme. Okay. Okay.
Right, don't say anybody else.
Motion to adjourn, please. All those in favor? Aye.